I think Islamabad sits in a very awkward position in that the original intention was how to make Islamabad a global center whereby it can elevate itself to sit with the major players as a major power in the region. The problem, however, is that these negotiations are proving harder than Asim Munir anticipated. The reason I'm focusing on Asim Munir here is because this is Asim Munir's gambit. If you notice, he's the one always being mentioned in the tweets. He's in a way that's quite unusual for state diplomacy. If you think about it, Donald Trump, when he speaks with Macron about military affairs in the region, he doesn't say, "I thank Macron and the chief of staff" in a tweet. When he speaks with Keir Starmer, he doesn't say, "I had a wonderful discussion with Keir Starmer and the UK chief of staff." When he speaks with China, he doesn't say, "I sat with Xi Jinping" or "I spoke with Xi Jinping and the chief of staff." It only seems to be a Pakistani thing whereby the army chief of staff is mentioned in a superior context to that of the supposedly elected prime minister. This is Asim Munir's gambit. Asim Munir needs these talks to succeed, to continue elevating his status, in that given that he's spent a lot of time trying to win over the Americans, so that they might cement his authority in Pakistan after the whole fiasco that took place with Imran Khan and preventing elections in Punjab after PTI won the landslide election, after putting him in prison and throwing 200 charges at him and trying to find a way to make him go away, and then the fiasco that took place in the elections that took place whereby the rigging wasn't necessarily as effective as it should have been, and some independent PTI candidates almost beat even Maryam Nawaz and these others. Asim Munir wants to be on the good side of the Americans, one, to leverage them against the Indians, and also to affirm his own rule as the ruler of Pakistan. The problem, however, is, and what's coming up, is this defense pact security agreement that he has with Saudi Arabia. Because the Saudis are unsure what's the best way to approach Iran. Should they be supporting the talks between Trump and the Iranians? Or should they be preparing for war again, a renewed conflict? A conflict that the Israelis and the Americans want the Saudis to fight. A conflict whereby the UAE wants to make sure that Iran doesn't come out of it a tiger, that Iran doesn't come out of it as a country that can continue to exert pressure on the Hormuz Strait and essentially hold the UAE economy to ransom. The problem with the security pact now that Asim Munir is finding, that he negotiated outside of the mandate of an elected government. So they topple Imran Khan, there's a caretaker government. Usually it shouldn't have the right to negotiate a security agreement, but in Pakistan it doesn't seem to matter. Asim Munir goes and negotiates this security pact with the Saudis. I think the intention of the security agreement was that Pakistan would never really be called upon to fight on behalf of the Saudis. It would be maybe a technology exchange. And in return, Pakistan would get money from Saudi Arabia. And Asim Munir would use that money in order to try to find some sort of short economic fixes by which he can appease the Pakistani people in order to prevent them from continuing to challenge an unelected authority. The problem is that now the Saudis seem to be invoking that defense treaty, saying that there is a possibility that war with Iran might come about again, and the Americans have failed to protect Saudi infrastructure. So the Saudis are effectively saying, we might consider that the Pakistanis do the fighting for us, not the Saudis. The Qataris are also interested in this, that not the Qataris do the fighting. The Pakistanis do the fighting on behalf of the Qataris and the Saudis. And that's deeply problematic for Pakistan, which has a very long border with Iran. That's deeply problematic for Pakistan, which is not interested in fighting the Iranians. It's not interested in getting into a conflict with the Iranians. And it knows how difficult it is to fight the Iranians. And the Pakistani economy is not in a position whereby it can go to war, even if it is for $8 billion that the Saudis are reportedly offering them. The UAE, which was angry at Islamabad for facilitating the talks because it wanted war, lashed out and demanded the return of its loan. Some are saying it's because the UAE need the money. Maybe, maybe not. But regardless, as soon as UAE withdrew that money, the Saudis and the Qataris stepped in to give that money to Pakistan. Almost as if to say to the Pakistanis that, listen, we still want you to do as we ask and we are expecting the support. The problem for Islamabad now is it may well go from being a mediator to being an active player, or being asked to be an active player by not only the Saudis but also by the Americans. If you imagine the lobbying that might be taking place between the UAE and the Americans, UAE and the Americans, and perhaps even Saudi and the Americans, may be discussing and saying, Mr. Trump, in the event that you choose to go back to war, there is a possibility we can use the Pakistani army. There's a possibility we can use Pakistan as a means by which to apply greater pressure on the Iranians. If Asim Munir is asked by Donald Trump to intervene and start applying pressure on the Iranians, does he do so? If he doesn't do so, do Saudi and Qatar withdraw that funding and plunge his country into a renewed economic crisis? How far is Asim Munir willing to go in order to preserve a position that lacks a mandate? And to what extent will he choose the interests of the security and stability of Pakistan over the preservation of his own position? In other words, the gamble that Asim Munir has taken in putting Islamabad as the mediator may well be a poisoned chalice that could put him in serious trouble if the Americans and the Iranians don't find a deal.